vanishing folklore and belief.
The Cock and the Fox. Public domain reading, Aesop's Fables with application. The fox, passing early one summer's morning near a farmyard, was caught in a springe which the farmer had planted there for that end. The cock at a distance saw what happened, and hardly yet daring to trust himself too near so dangerous a foe, approached him cautiously and peeped at him, not without some horror and dread of mind. Reynard no sooner perceived it, but he addressed himself to him with all the designing artifice imaginable.
"Dear cousin," says he, "you see what an unfortunate accident has befallen me, and all upon your account. For, as I was creeping through yonder hedge in my way homeward, I heard you crow, and was resolved to ask you how you did before. I went any further, but by the way I met with this disaster, and therefore now I must become a humble suitor to you for a knife to cut this plaguey string, or at least that you would conceal my misfortune till I have gnawed it asunder with my teeth."
The cock, seeing how the case stood, made no reply, but posted away as fast as he could, and gave the farmer an account of the whole matter, who, taking a good weapon along with him, came and did the fox's business before he could have time to contrive his escape. Application. Though there is no quality of the mind more graceful in itself, or that renders it more amiable to others, than the having a tender regard for those who are in distress, yet we may err even in this point, unless we take care to let our compassion flow out upon proper objects only. When the innocent fall into misfortune, it is the part of a generous and brave spirit to contribute to their redemption, or, if that be impossible, to administer something to their comfort and support. But when wicked men, who have been enemies to their fellow subjects, are entrapped in their own pernicious schemes, he that labors to deliver them makes himself an associate in their crimes, and becomes as great an enemy to the public as those whom he would screen and protect. When highwaymen and housebreakers are taken, condemned and going to satisfy justice at the expense of their vile paltry lives, who are then they that grieve for them, and would be glad to rescue them from the rope? Not honest men, we may be sure. The rest of the thieving fraternity would perhaps commiserate their condition, and be ready to mutiny in their favor. Nay, the rascally solicitor, who had been employed upon their account, would be vexed that his negotiations had succeeded no better, and be afraid of losing his reputation among other delinquents for the future. But every friend to justice would have no reason to be dissatisfied at anything but a mournful reflection, which he could not forbear making, that while these little criminals swing on the rope for some trifling inconsiderable rapine, others so transcendently their superiors in fraud and plunder escape with a whole skin.
The Fox in the Well. A fox, having fallen into a well, made a shift by sticking his claws into the sides to keep his head above water. Soon after a wolf came and peeped over the brink, to whom the fox applied himself very earnestly for assistance, entreating that he would help him to a rope, or something of that kind, which might favor his escape. The wolf, moved with compassion at his misfortune, could not forbear expressing his concern. "Ah, poor Reynard," says he, "I am sorry for you with all my heart. How could you possibly come into this melancholy condition?" "Nay, prithee, friend," replies the fox, "if you wish me well, do not stand pitying of me, but lend me some succor as fast as you can, for pity is but cold comfort when one is up to the chin in water, and within a hair's breadth of starving or drowning." Application. Pity, indeed, is of itself but poor comfort at any time, and, unless it produces something more substantial, is rather impertinently troublesome than any way agreeable. To stand bemoaning the misfortunes of our friends without offering some expedient to alleviate them is only echoing to their grief, and putting them in mind that they are miserable. He is truly my friend who, with a ready presence of mind, supports me, not he who condoles me upon my ill successes, and says he is sorry for my loss. In short, a favor or obligation is doubled by being well timed, and he is the best benefactor who knows our necessities and complies with our wishes, even before we ask him. The wolves and the sheep. The wolves and the sheep had been a long time in a state of war together. At last, a cessation of arms was proposed in order to a treaty of peace, and hostages were to be delivered on both sides for security. The wolves proposed that the sheep should give up their dogs on the one side, and that they would deliver up their young ones on the other. This proposal was agreed to, but no sooner executed than the young wolves began to howl for want of their dams. The old wolves took this opportunity to cry out that the treaty was broken, and so falling upon the sheep, who were destitute of their faithful guardian of dogs, they devoured them without control. Application. In all our transactions with mankind, even in the most private and low life, we should have a special regard how and with whom we trust ourselves. Men in this respect ought to look upon each other as wolves, and to keep themselves under a secure guard, and in a continual posture of defense, particularly upon any treaties of importance. The securities on both sides should be strictly considered, and each should act with so cautious a view to their own interest as never to pledge or part with that which is the very essence and basis of their safety, security, and well-being. And if this be a just and reasonable rule for men to govern themselves by in their own private affairs, how much more fitting and necessary is it in any conjuncture wherein the public is concerned? If the enemy should demand our whole army for a hostage, the danger in our complying with it would be so gross and apparent that we could not help observing it. But perhaps a country may equally expose itself by parting with a particular town or general as its whole army. as its whole army, its safety not seldom depending as much upon one of the former as upon the latter. In short, hostages and securities may be something very dear to us, but ought never to be given up if our welfare and preservation have any dependence upon them.
Vanishing folklore.